signal came without warning, and it changed everything. I was standing in the grand hall of the Cassian Council when the alert flashed across every screen in the chamber. A new species had been found. A species that should not have existed, according to every model we had built over 10,000 years of watching the stars. They called themselves humans, and they lived on a small blue world at the edge of a quiet spiral arm, a place none of us had ever thought worth a second look. My name is Vess. I am a member of the Cassian Council, an old and careful body that has guided contact between worlds for longer than most civilizations have existed. We do not rush. We do not gamble. Every decision we make is built on centuries of data, patience, and caution. That is why, when the Council chose me to be the first ambassador sent to Earth, I felt something I had not felt in a very long time. I felt afraid. The Council elders gathered around the central table, their faces lit by the soft blue glow of the star maps hovering above us. Elder Thessa, the oldest among us, spoke first. "The humans have crossed a threshold," she said. "They have weapons capable of ending their own world many times over. They have fought among themselves for thousands of years, yet they still stand. They have looked into the dark of space, and instead of turning away, they built machines to look back. This is not a primitive species, this is something else." I remember the silence that followed her words. It was not the silence of agreement. It was the silence of uncertainty. And among a species as old as ours, uncertainty is rare and unwelcome. "They are unpredictable," said Elder Corrin, his voice sharp with concern. "Every report from our long-range observers shows the same pattern. Conflict, recovery, growth, conflict again. They do not follow the paths other young species follow. They should have destroyed themselves by now. And yet, here they are, reaching for the stars." I sat quietly and listened, because that is what a good ambassador does before he speaks. But inside, my mind was already racing. I had studied thousands of pages on human history in the days before this meeting. I had seen their wars, their inventions, their strange mixture of cruelty and kindness that seemed to exist side by side in every corner of their world. I had seen how they could build hospitals and shelters for strangers, and in the very same breath, build weapons meant to end life on a massive scale. I did not understand them. None of us did. That was the entire reason the Council wanted someone to go and see them with their own eyes, not through a screen or a report, but standing among them, breathing their air, hearing their voices. "We need an ambassador," Elder Thessa said, turning to look directly at me. "Someone calm, someone who will not provoke them, someone who can observe without judging too quickly." I felt every eye in the chamber turn toward me, and I understood in that moment that the decision had already been made before I walked into the room. I was chosen not because I was the strongest or the most experienced, but because I was careful, because I asked questions before I acted, because, in the eyes of the Council, I was the safest choice to send toward the most uncertain species we had ever encountered. "I accept," I said, though my voice did not sound as steady as I wanted it to. The days that followed were filled with preparation. I studied their languages, their customs, their history, though I quickly learned that no amount of study could truly prepare a person for a species like this. I read about their wars, about the millions of lives lost across centuries of conflict, and I wondered how a people who had caused so much pain to each other could also create such beauty. Their music moved through me in ways I did not expect. Their art told stories of hope, even in the middle of despair. Their history was full of destruction, yet somehow, they always rebuilt. I remember one report in particular, describing a human city that had been almost completely destroyed during a great war, only to be rebuilt within a few decades into something even greater than before. The report noted this without much explanation, as if it were simply expected, as if humans always did this, as if losing everything was just another part of their story, one chapter among many, never the final page. On the day I departed, the Council gathered to see me off. There were no grand speeches, no celebrations, just quiet nods and careful words of caution. "Observe first," Elder Thessa told me. "Speak only when necessary. Do not offer them anything that could be used against us. And Vess, if things go wrong, do not hesitate. Return immediately." I nodded, though even then, I did not fully understand what she meant by things going wrong. I assumed she meant conflict, danger, perhaps even an attack. I did not yet understand that the greatest danger waiting for me on Earth was not going to be a weapon or a battle. It was going to be something far harder to explain. The journey took several days by our fastest ships, though to the humans it would have seemed impossibly quick. When my vessel entered their solar system, I felt a strange mixture of excitement and dread. Their world came into view slowly, a blue and green sphere wrapped in soft white clouds, spinning quietly in the dark. From a distance, it looked peaceful, almost gentle. It was hard to believe this was the same world capable of the violence described in our reports. I landed in a wide-open field just outside one of their smaller cities, following the coordinates the humans themselves had provided once contact was confirmed. I had expected soldiers. I had expected weapons pointed at my ship the moment the doors opened. Instead, I found something far stranger. A small group of humans stood waiting, calm and curious, no weapons in sight. A woman stepped forward first. She had short brown hair and sharp, intelligent eyes that studied me carefully, though without fear. "Welcome to Earth," she said, her voice steady. "My name is Grace Coleman. I'll be one of the people helping you settle in during your visit." I stood at the entrance of my ship for a long moment, unsure of what to say. Every part of my training had prepared me for hostility, for suspicion, for careful negotiation under pressure. Nothing had prepared me for this simple, calm greeting, as if I were an old friend arriving for a visit, rather than the first alien ambassador to ever set foot on their world. "Thank you," I finally said, stepping down onto the soft grass. "I am honored to be here." Grace smiled, though there was something thoughtful behind her eyes, something that told me she was studying me just as closely as I was studying her. "We've been waiting a long time for this moment," she said, "longer than you probably realize." I did not understand what she meant by that at the time. I assumed she was simply speaking about the years since they had first detected our signals, the slow and careful process of establishing contact. I did not yet understand that humans had been preparing for this moment, in ways far deeper than simple communication. As we walked toward the small group of officials waiting nearby, I noticed something odd. There were no soldiers standing guard, no weapons pointed toward my ship, just a handful of people, watching with quiet curiosity, some smiling, some simply observing in silence. A man stepped forward next, tall and broad-shouldered, with a friendly face that seemed completely at ease. "Name's Daniel Marsh," he said, extending his hand toward me. I remembered from my studies that this was a human greeting, a gesture of trust and respect. I took his hand carefully, mimicking the motion I had practiced. "I am Vess," I said, "Ambassador of the Cassian Council." "Big title," Daniel said with a small laugh. "Hope it doesn't come with too much pressure." I did not know how to respond to that. Humor, I would soon learn, was something they used constantly, even in moments that seemed far too serious for jokes. It was one of the many things about them that confused me during those early days. We walked together toward a nearby building, one of their government facilities, though it looked far less impressive than I had imagined. No towering walls, no visible defenses, just simple architecture, practical and unassuming. Inside, more humans waited, scientists, translators, government officials, each one studying me, with the same calm curiosity I had seen in Grace and Daniel. I had expected fear. I had expected suspicion. Instead, I found something closer to quiet fascination, as if my arrival was less of a threat and more of an opportunity. "We have a lot of questions for you," said an older man near the back of the room, his voice steady and thoughtful. "But I imagine you have quite a few questions for us as well." "I do," I admitted. "Many, in fact." "Then let's start simple," Grace said, gesturing toward a chair set at the center of the room. "Tell us about your people, and we'll tell you about ours." I sat down slowly, aware of every eye in the room watching me closely. This was the beginning of everything the council had sent me here to do. The careful exchange of knowledge, the slow building of trust between two very different worlds. But even in that first hour, something felt different than I had expected. There was a strange confidence in the way these humans carried themselves, a calmness that did not match the chaotic history I had studied. They spoke of their wars and their struggles with an honesty that surprised me, never trying to hide their darker moments, yet never seeming ashamed of them either. It was as if they understood something about themselves that even their own historical records failed to fully capture. As the conversation continued deep into the evening, I found myself asking more questions than I answered, each new piece of information only deepening the mystery of who these people truly were. They spoke of survival, of loss, of rebuilding again and again after disaster, and through it all, there was a strange thread of quiet determination running beneath every word. By the time the meeting ended, and I was shown to the quarters they had prepared for me, my mind was filled with more questions than I had brought with me from home. I had expected to spend my time on Earth, observing a dangerous and unpredictable species, carefully documenting behaviors to bring back to the Council. Instead, as I lay awake that first night, staring up at an unfamiliar ceiling in a world so different from my own, I realized the truth was far more complicated than any report could have prepared me for. These humans were not simply surviving. They were something the Council had never truly understood, and I was only beginning to see the first small pieces of a much larger picture, one that would take every day of my time on Earth to fully uncover. Somewhere deep inside, a quiet voice told me that this assignment would not end the way the Council expected. I did not know yet how right that feeling would turn out to be. The next morning began with a sound I had never heard before, a soft chime coming from a small device Grace had left in my room the night before. She had called it a clock, explaining that humans used it to measure the passing of time in careful, structured pieces. I found it strange how something so simple could shape an entire civilization, yet as the days passed, I began to understand just how deeply structured human life truly was, even in the middle of chaos. Grace arrived shortly after, dressed in simple clothing, carrying 2 cups of a dark, steaming liquid she called coffee. "Thought you might want to try this," she said, handing me one of the cups. "Most people can't function without it." I took a careful sip, unfamiliar with the bitter taste, though I did my best to hide my reaction. Grace laughed softly, clearly noticing my discomfort. "You'll get used to it," she said, "or you won't. Either way, we've got a full day ahead of us." That day marked the beginning of what would become weeks of careful observation, as I was taken from one location to another, each new place revealing another piece of the puzzle that was humanity. We visited hospitals first, large buildings filled with humans working tirelessly to heal others, regardless of who they were or where they came from. I watched doctors treat patients with a level of care and dedication that reminded me of some of our own healers back home, yet there was something different in the way these humans approached suffering. They did not simply treat illness, they fought against it, as if refusing to accept defeat, even when the odds were clearly against them. "We don't like losing," Daniel explained during one of our visits, standing beside me as we watched a team of surgeons working through a difficult procedure. "Doesn't matter what we're up against. Disease, disaster, each other. We just keep fighting." I asked him what he meant by fighting each other, and his expression grew more serious. "Our history isn't exactly peaceful," he admitted. "We've had wars. Some of the worst kind. Times when we turned on each other for reasons that probably seem foolish looking back. But even after all that, we always find a way to rebuild." I thought of my studies, the endless reports detailing centuries of conflict scattered across human history. Yet standing here, watching these same people dedicate themselves so completely to saving lives, I found it difficult to reconcile the two sides of their nature. Later that week, we visited one of their schools, a place where young humans gathered to learn. I expected a simple lesson in mathematics or language, but instead, I found myself sitting quietly in the back of a classroom as a teacher spoke about their history, including the darkest chapters of war and loss. "Why do you teach them this?" I asked afterward, genuinely curious. "Why show your children the worst parts of your past?" The teacher, a woman named Claire, looked at me thoughtfully before answering. "Because if we hide it from them, they'll never understand why it's so important to do better," she said. "We don't teach our history to make our children afraid. We teach it so they never forget what we're capable of, both the good and the bad." Her answer stayed with me long after we left the school. It was a strange kind of wisdom, one built not on avoiding pain, but on facing it directly, using it as a lesson, rather than something to be buried and forgotten. As the days passed, I began sending detailed reports back to the Council, describing everything I observed. At first, my reports were filled with careful, measured language, the kind expected of a diplomat gathering information. But as time went on, I noticed my own tone beginning to shift, filled with a growing sense of unease that I struggled to fully explain even to myself. It was not fear exactly. It was something closer to quiet awe, mixed with confusion. These humans did not fit into any pattern the Council had studied before. They were capable of both incredible kindness and devastating conflict, sometimes within the very same breath. They built weapons capable of massive destruction, yet spoke openly about wanting peace. They fought wars against each other, yet worked together to build hospitals, schools, and shelters for those in need. One evening, after a long day of observation, Daniel invited me to join him at a place he called a bar, a small, quiet establishment filled with soft lighting and the low hum of conversation. I had grown used to these small gestures of human hospitality by then, though I still found myself surprised by how easily they welcomed me into their world. We sat at a table near the back, away from the noise of the other patrons, and Daniel ordered a drink for himself, before turning to look at me with a curious expression. "You've been awfully quiet the last few days," he said. "Something on your mind?" I hesitated before answering, unsure how much I should reveal, but something about Daniel's calm, patient nature made it easy to speak honestly. "I don't understand your people," I admitted. "Every report I studied before coming here painted a picture of chaos and violence, yet everywhere I look, I see kindness, sacrifice, determination. I don't know how to reconcile the two." Daniel leaned back in his chair, considering my words carefully before responding. "That's the thing about us," he said. "We're not one thing or the other. We're both, all the time. We fight because sometimes we have to, and we build because we refuse to stop trying to make things better. It's messy. It doesn't always make sense, even to us." I studied him closely, searching for some hidden meaning behind his words, though his expression remained calm and open. "Do you ever worry," I asked slowly, "that one day the fighting will win?" Daniel was quiet for a long moment before answering. "Every generation worries about that," he said, "but somehow, we always find a way to keep going. Maybe that's the difference between us and what your council expected. We don't just survive because we're strong. We survive because we refuse to stop trying, no matter how many times we fall down." His words settled deep into my mind, staying with me long after we left the bar that night. I began to understand, slowly, that humanity was not simply a dangerous or unpredictable species, as the Council had feared. They were something far more complicated, a people shaped equally by their darkest moments and their greatest achievements, refusing to be defined by either alone. But even as my understanding of them grew deeper, a quiet unease continued to grow alongside it. Because the more time I spent among them, the more I began to notice something else, something hidden just beneath the surface of their friendly, welcoming nature. There was a carefulness to the way they spoke, a subtle awareness that seemed to run through every conversation, every interaction, as if they were not simply meeting a visitor from another world with open curiosity, but quietly, carefully evaluating something far larger. I did not yet understand what that something was, but as the days turned into weeks, I began to suspect that humanity's calm welcome was not simply born from trust or curiosity. It was born from patience, a patience built over countless generations of survival, conflict, and quiet preparation for a moment they had clearly been expecting long before my ship ever entered their sky. And that realization, more than anything else I had witnessed so far, was what truly began to trouble me. It was during the third week of my visit that Daniel took me to a small, quiet place he called a diner, tucked away on the edge of the city where fewer people gathered. He said he wanted to talk somewhere less formal, somewhere without officials listening carefully to every word we exchanged. I agreed, curious about what he wanted to share. We sat in a corner booth, the soft hum of the diner's old machines filling the silence between us. Daniel ordered 2 cups of coffee, though this time I had grown used to the bitter taste enough to drink it without hesitation. "You've seen a lot since you got here," Daniel said, stirring his drink slowly. "Hospitals, schools, government buildings. But there's something else I think you should understand about us, something that doesn't show up in official reports." I leaned forward slightly, sensing the shift in his tone. "What is it?" I asked. Daniel was quiet for a moment, as if choosing his words carefully. "We've spent our whole history fighting something," he said. "Diseases, disasters, empires, each other. Sometimes even the planet itself. It's in our nature to struggle against whatever stands in our way. It's shaped who we are, for better or worse." I nodded. remembering the countless historical records I had studied before my arrival, filled with stories of conflict and survival stretching back thousands of years. But here's the thing, Daniel continued. What happens when there's nothing left to fight? When we finally reach a point where the struggles that shaped us for so long are behind us? I considered his question carefully before answering. I imagine that would bring peace, I said, a chance to finally rest. Daniel smiled faintly, though there was a weight behind his eyes that told me he did not fully agree. Maybe, he said, or maybe we just find something new to fight. Maybe that's just who we are. His words settled uncomfortably in my mind, echoing something I had begun to suspect during my time among them, but had not yet fully understood. Is that why you were so calm when my ship arrived? I asked slowly. Because you had already prepared for something like this? Daniel's expression grew more serious, and for the first time since I had met him, I sensed a careful hesitation behind his usually open nature. We knew you were out there long before your ship arrived, he admitted. Not just from the signals we picked up. We suspected we weren't alone in this universe long before we had proof. And when you finally showed up, we weren't about to be caught off guard. I felt a strange chill settle over me at his words, though I kept my expression carefully neutral, trying to understand the full weight of what he was telling me. What do you mean by prepared? I asked. Daniel hesitated again, glancing around the quiet diner before leaning in closer. I probably shouldn't be telling you this, he admitted, but I think you deserve to know the truth, especially after everything you've seen these past few weeks. He took a slow breath before continuing. We've spent decades preparing for the possibility of contact with another civilization. Not just diplomatic preparations, but real practical steps, defensive strategies, contingency plans. We didn't know if you'd come in peace or with hostile intentions, so we made sure we were ready either way. I studied him carefully, searching for any sign of exaggeration in his words, but his expression remained calm and serious, without a trace of the humor he usually carried. You believed we might attack you, I said slowly. We couldn't rule it out, Daniel admitted. History's taught us that first encounters between different groups don't always go well, even among our own people. We had no way of knowing what your intentions were, so we made sure we weren't defenseless, no matter what happened. I sat in silence for a long moment, processing the weight of what he had just revealed. I had spent weeks observing humanity with growing admiration for their resilience and kindness, yet beneath that calm and welcoming surface, there had always been a quiet, careful readiness, a preparation for conflict that I had completely failed to notice. Does the rest of your government know you're telling me this? I asked carefully. Daniel gave a small, tired smile. Some things are better understood honestly, he said. I think it's important you go back to your council with the full picture, not just the parts that make us look friendly and harmless. I nodded slowly, though my mind was already racing, trying to piece together everything I had witnessed during my time on Earth. The calm confidence, the lack of fear when my ship first arrived, the careful, thoughtful way every human I had met seemed to study me, even in our friendliest conversations. It was not simple curiosity. It was quiet, patient observation, the same kind of careful evaluation I had been trained to perform as a diplomat. These humans were not simply reacting to my arrival with open trust. They were carefully assessing whether I represented a threat, all while maintaining a calm and welcoming appearance. I think I understand now, I said quietly. Your kindness isn't weakness, it's confidence. Daniel nodded slowly. We're not looking for a fight, he said. We never wanted one, but we also don't believe in walking into the unknown without being ready for whatever might come our way. As we sat together in that quiet diner, I began to realize just how deeply I had underestimated the complexity of humanity. The Council had feared them as an unpredictable and violent species, dangerous simply because of their history of conflict. Yet what I had discovered was something far more layered, a people shaped by both hardship and hope, capable of tremendous kindness, while never losing sight of the careful vigilance needed to protect themselves. There's something else, Daniel said after a long pause, his voice quieter now. Something I think you should see before your time here is over. I looked at him carefully, sensing the seriousness in his tone. What is it? I asked. Daniel hesitated once more before answering. Something most of the world doesn't even know exists, he said. a part of our preparation that goes beyond simple defense. I think it's time you understood the full picture of what we've been building, quietly, in case a moment like this ever arrived." A heavy silence settled between us, the quiet hum of the diner suddenly feeling much louder than before. I did not know what he was about to show me, but I understood, deep down, that whatever it was would change everything I thought I understood about humanity. And as I sat there, staring at my half-finished cup of coffee, I felt a quiet certainty settle over me. The council had sent me here to observe a species they believed to be dangerous, simply because of their capacity for conflict. But the truth, I was beginning to realize, was far more unsettling. Humanity was not dangerous because of the wars they had fought. They were dangerous because of how carefully, patiently, and quietly they prepared for wars they hoped would never come. And I was about to see exactly how deep that preparation truly went. 2 days later, Daniel arranged for me to meet with a man named Henry Prescott, a quiet, serious government official who oversaw programs that were rarely discussed openly, even among other branches of human leadership. We met in a small, secure facility on the outskirts of the city, far away from the busy streets and curious crowds that had followed me during my earlier visits. Henry greeted me with a firm handshake and a calm, measured expression, though I could sense a careful watchfulness behind his eyes. "Daniel tells me you're ready to understand the fuller picture," Henry said, leading me down a quiet hallway lined with simple, unmarked doors. "I would like to," I said honestly. "I feel as though I've only seen a small part of who your people truly are." Henry nodded, opening a door that led into a large underground chamber filled with screens, monitoring equipment, and quiet, focused workers moving carefully between stations. "This is one of several facilities scattered around the world," Henry explained. "Places built quietly, without much public attention, dedicated to studying the possibility of contact with other civilizations, and preparing for whatever might come from it." I studied the room carefully, taking in the scale of the operation before me. Massive screens displayed information I did not fully understand: star charts, defensive simulations, careful analyses of potential threats from beyond their world. "You've been preparing for this for a long time," I said quietly. "Longer than most people realize," Henry admitted. "We started taking the possibility of contact seriously decades ago, long before we had any confirmed proof that other civilizations existed. We understood early on that if we were ever going to encounter another species, we needed to be ready, not just diplomatically, but strategically." He led me toward a large screen displaying a detailed simulation, one that appeared to model various possible outcomes of first contact scenarios, ranging from peaceful cooperation to more serious conflict. "We hoped for peace," Henry continued. "But hope alone has never been enough to guarantee survival, not in our history, and not in the history of any species we've studied. So while we welcomed you with open hands, we made sure those hands were never entirely empty." I felt a quiet chill settle over me as I studied the screen more closely, beginning to understand the depth of careful planning that had gone into humanity's preparation for this exact moment. "Does your council know about this?" I asked. "The full extent of what you've built?" Henry's expression grew more serious. "No," he admitted, "and that's precisely the point. We've learned throughout our history that some of the most important preparations are the ones made quietly, without drawing unnecessary attention. We didn't want to appear as a threat before we even had the chance to prove ourselves capable of peace." I considered his words carefully, understanding now why Daniel had been so hesitant to share this information with me earlier. It was not simply a matter of national security. It was a careful, calculated decision, one built on centuries of hard-learned caution. As we continued walking through the facility, Henry showed me detailed records outlining humanity's quiet efforts to strengthen their world's defenses, not through aggression, but through careful, patient preparation. They had developed advanced technology capable of detecting threats from beyond their solar system. They had trained specialized teams ready to respond to a wide range of potential scenarios. They had built systems designed not to strike first, but to ensure they would never be caught completely unprepared. "You could have shown the council all of this from the beginning," I said. "Why keep it hidden?" Henry paused, considering his answer carefully before responding. "Because we needed to understand your intentions first," he said. "If we had revealed the full scale of our preparations too early, it might have been misunderstood as aggression rather than caution. We wanted to give peace every possible chance before showing you the full picture of what stands behind it. I nodded slowly, understanding the careful logic behind his words, even as a quiet unease continued to settle deep within me. And now that I've seen it? I asked. Henry looked at me steadily, his expression calm but serious. Now, it's up to you to decide how you present this to your council, he said. We're not looking for conflict. We never have been. But we needed you to understand that our kindness was never a sign of weakness. It was simply the first step, taken carefully, before showing you everything else we're capable of. As I stood there, surrounded by the quiet hum of machines and the careful, focused presence of humanity's hidden preparations, I understood, perhaps more clearly than ever before, just how deeply the Council had misjudged this species. They were not simply dangerous because of their history of conflict. They were dangerous because of their patience, their discipline, and their quiet, careful readiness to face whatever challenges the universe placed before them, all while maintaining a calm and welcoming exterior that could easily be mistaken for simplicity. I left that facility carrying a weight I had not expected to carry, a deep, unsettling understanding that would follow me during every remaining day of my time on Earth. The Council had sent me to observe a species they viewed as primitive and unpredictable. Instead, I had discovered something far more complex, a people who had learned, through generations of hardship and survival, exactly how to balance kindness with quiet, unwavering strength. And as my time on Earth drew closer to its end, I began to realize that the report I would eventually bring back to the Council would need to capture something far more difficult to explain than simple observations of human behavior. It would need to capture the quiet, careful truth I had only just begun to understand. Humanity was never simply waiting to be judged worthy of peace. They were quietly, patiently preparing for whatever came next, regardless of what that might be. My final days on Earth passed quickly, filled with quiet conversations, careful farewells, and a growing sense of unease that I could not fully shake, no matter how hard I tried. Grace and Daniel accompanied me during my last few visits, each moment carrying a strange weight, as if everyone around me understood that something important had shifted since my arrival, though no one spoke of it directly. On the evening before my departure, Grace joined me outside the small quarters I had been given. The night sky stretched wide and quiet above us, filled with countless stars. I now understood a little differently than before. "You've been quiet the last few days," she said softly, standing beside me as we looked up at the sky. "I have a lot to think about," I admitted, "more than I expected when I first arrived." Grace nodded slowly, her expression calm but thoughtful. "I imagine seeing everything Henry showed you changed things," she said. I looked at her carefully, wondering how much she truly knew about that hidden facility, though I suspected she understood far more than she let on. "It did," I admitted. "I came here expecting to study a species defined by conflict. Instead, I found something far more complicated. A people capable of incredible kindness, built on a foundation of quiet, careful strength." Grace smiled faintly, though there was a seriousness behind her eyes that told me she understood the full weight of what I was trying to say. "That's who we are," she said simply. "We don't offer peace because we're weak or naive. We offer it because we understand its value, better than most, precisely because we've seen how costly its absence can be." I nodded slowly, letting her words settle deep within me as I prepared for the long journey home, carrying with me a report unlike anything the Council had ever received before. The next morning, my ship prepared for departure, surrounded by a small group of humans who had become far more than simple observers during my time among them. Daniel offered a firm handshake, his expression calm but sincere. "Tell your council the truth," he said. "All of it. We're not looking for conflict, but we won't pretend to be something we're not either." "I will," I promised. As my ship lifted away from Earth's surface, rising quietly into the dark expanse of space, I found myself looking back at that small blue world one final time, carrying with me a understanding far deeper than any report could have prepared me for. The Council had sent me to determine whether humanity was a threat. Instead, I returned with a truth far more difficult to explain, one that would leave the entire chamber in complete, uneasy silence the moment I delivered my final report. Because humanity was never simply waiting to be judged. They had already judged the universe long before we ever arrived, and quietly, patiently, prepared themselves for whatever answer that judgment might bring. When I finally stood before the council once again, surrounded by the same careful, watchful faces that had sent me on this journey, I found myself unable to offer the simple, measured report they expected. Instead, I placed my data crystal onto the table and said nothing at all. I let my recorded log speak for me, my own voice recounting everything I had witnessed, every quiet moment of kindness, every careful glimpse of hidden strength, every unsettling realization I had gathered during my time on that small, remarkable world. The chamber remained silent long after the recording ended, each council member processing the weight of what they had just heard. Because in that silence, we all understood something we had never fully considered before. We had spent so long studying humanity, searching for signs of danger hidden within their history of conflict, that we had completely overlooked the far more important truth standing quietly beneath it all. Humanity was never simply capable of destruction. They were capable of patience, discipline, and quiet, unwavering resolve, qualities far more powerful and far more difficult to predict than any weapon or war we had studied before. And as the council sat in stunned silence around me, I understood, perhaps for the first time, that first contact with Earth was never truly about determining whether they were ready for the wider universe. It was about determining whether the universe was truly ready for them.